Topic 9. International Conflicts and Crises in the 20th Century, Part 1. The Two World Wars. History GPS. The most devastating wars in human history, the two world wars. In the first half of the 20th century, humans experienced the two most devastating wars in history. The First World War from 1914 to 1918 and the Second World War from 1939 to 1945, both were worldwide conflicts and affected many countries. The great scope of the wars and advancements in armaments caused heavy casualties and devastation. The two wars also weakened the European countries, making them incapable of maintaining colonial rule. Their colonies in Asia and Africa called for independence. Many new states were founded in a wave of decolonization. Topic Inquiry. Why did the two world wars occur? What were the impacts of the two wars and what we can learn from them? 1. The First World War. In the early 20th century, due to economic and colonial conflicts, alliance systems, armaments race, and the rise of extreme nationalism, relations among the European powers worsened. They joined a local conflict one after another. Ultimately, the First World War broke out. 2. The Second World War. As many problems remained unresolved after the First World War, the post-war peace did not last long. The aggressions of Japan, Italy, and Germany intensified in the 1930s. Germany's expansion ultimately led to the Second World War. 3. Lessons from the wars and post-war development. The two world wars disrupted people's livelihoods and massacres took place. Human civilization was devastated. Furthermore, European colonial powers were weakened after the two wars. Their colonies in Asia and Africa gained independence successively, gradually emerging as new political forces in the international arena. Look at the timeline of important events. 1914-1918, First World War. War between the Central Powers and the Allied Powers. The Allied Powers won the war. 1919, Paris Peace Conference. Discussed post-war settlements, but problems remained unresolved. 1920, League of Nations established. First international organization dedicated to maintaining peace through collective security. 1939 to 1945, Second World War. War between the Axis powers and the Allied powers. The Allied powers won the war. 1955, Bandung Conference. Organized primarily by the newly independent Asian and African states after the Second World War, reaffirming their anti-colonial states. 1961, Non-aligned movement established. Cooperation between the newly independent Asian and African states and other participating countries supporting national self-determination. History Starter. 1. At the end of the 19th century, European countries had strong military and economic power. They established many colonies in Asia and Africa, resulting in European hegemony. 2. They competed for national glory and economic interests. Conflicts increased and tension grew. The situation in the Balkans in southern East Europe was particularly serious. 3. In 1914, conflicts between the European countries caused a war in Europe, which rapidly became a world war. This war, occurring between 1914 and 1918, is known as the First World War. 4. In 1919, the Paris Peace Conference was held to discuss post-war settlements. However, both Germans and Italians were dissatisfied with their democratic governments for accepting the post-war arrangements. 5. Post-war economic problems also undermined the democratic system in some countries. The Great Depression, which started in 1929, further hit and weak economies of Europe and Japan. 6. Totalitarianism eventually emerged in Italy, Germany, and Japan. These totalitarian regimes adopted aggressive foreign policies. Eventually, the German invasion of Poland triggered the Second World War between 1939 and 1945. 7. The two world wars caused unprecedented destruction and casualties. The European countries were weakened. Their colonies in Asia and Africa pushed for independence. Decolonization started. 8. After gaining independence, the former colonies in Asia and Africa cooperated with other countries. Together they formed the Third World, a rising political force in the international arena. A. Introduction to the two world wars. The first half of the 20th century saw the outbreak of two world wars. The Second World War is often regarded as a continuation of the First World War. 1. The First World War, from 1914 to 1918. In the early 20th century, European nationalism became extreme. The powers sought to have greater influence. This caused a number of international crises. The outbreak of the Austro-Serbian War in 1914 marked the start of the First World War. 2. The Second World War, from 1939 to 1945. The peace conference after the First World War failed to resolve international crises. Alongside the problematic post-war economy, totalitarian countries emerged in Europe and Asia. Their invasions sparked another world war in 1939. Look at the source 9.1, a summary table of the two world wars. The First World War. The rival camps were Central Powers, such as Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and Allied Powers, Britain, France, Russia, Japan, the United States. The causes were economic and colonial competition, armaments race, alliance system, extreme nationalism, pre-war conflicts. Immediate cause, the Sarajevo incident. The main battlefield was Europe. The Second World War. The rival camps were Axis powers, such as Germany, Italy, Japan, and Allied powers, Britain, France, the United States, the Soviet Union, China. The causes were failure of the Paris Peace Conference, economic problems in the interwar period, rise of totalitarianism and aggression, failure of collective security. Immediate cause, the German invasion of Poland. The main battlefields were Europe, Asia, and Africa. B. International relations and reasons for conflicts before the two world wars. Guiding question: what were the background and causes of the First World War? 1. The First World War. A. International situation before the war. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Britain, Germany, France, Austria-Hungary, and Russia were called European powers. They had strong economic and military power and dominated world affairs. However, relations between the European powers became tense. Economic and colonial competition, alliance system, armaments race, and extreme nationalism led to suspicion and hatred. The unstable European situation paved the way for a world war. Look at the source 9.2. International situation in the 1900s in focus. 1. Rise of Germany and its world politics. Germany quickly emerged as a European power after 1871. It adopted an expansionist foreign policy called world politics. Britain believed that Germany was a threat and thus their relations deteriorated. 2. Hostility between France and Germany. France was defeated in the Franco-Prussian War from 1870 to 1871. Germany also tried to isolate France afterwards. France wanted to take revenge on Germany, get back its land, and end its diplomatic isolation. 3. Ambitions of Austria-Hungary and Russia in the Balkans. After losing its control of Central Europe, Austria-Hungary hoped to expand in the Balkans in southern East Europe. Russia supported the expansion of Serbia, also a Slavic nation, in the Balkans. Austro-Russian relations worsened. B. Background and causes of the war. 1. Economic and colonial competition. Overview. In the late 19th and early 20th century, the European powers restricted the import of goods to protect their own industrial development. They also competed for overseas colonies to get markets and resources. During this period, Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia were almost entirely partitioned among the powers. Effects. Economic and colonial competition caused conflicts among the European powers. To protect their own interests, they formed alliances and expanded their armaments. The armaments race among the powers was then intensified. Look at the source 9.3. An American cartoon published in the late 19th century. It shows that Germany, Britain, and Russia were competing to get colonies in Asia and Africa. Look at the source 9.4. Major colonial conflicts in Africa from 1881 to 1911. 1. Moroccan crisis. Crisis happened when both France and Germany wanted to turn Morocco into their colony. Franco-German relations worsened. 2. Tunisian incident. Colonial conflicts broke out between Italy and France as both wanted to colonize Tunisia. France finally took Tunisia. Italy joined Germany and Austro-Hungary to form the Triple Alliance in response. 3. Fashoda incident. Armies of Britain and France met in Fashoda in Sudan, and war nearly broke out. France gave way at last, and Anglo-French relations improved. 2. Armaments race. Forms. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the European powers competed in expanding armies and armaments to protect their national security and overseas interests. The race took the following forms. Army race. They introduced conscription to build up large armies. Arm race. They developed new and more powerful weapons. Naval race. They built powerful battleships. Britain and Germany were the chief rivals. They competed in building dreadnoughts from 1906. Effects. The armaments race increased tensions and made war more likely. The European powers thought they were strong when they had a lot of weapons. They would not give way easily when they had quarrels with other countries. The armaments race made the Europeans more warlike. They believed that war could bring glory to their countries. They supported going to war to solve problems. Look at the source 9.5. The number of dreadnoughts built by Britain and Germany from 1906 to 1914. Dreadnoughts were most powerful battleships of the time. 3. Alliance system. Triple Alliance and Triple Entente. To isolate France, Germany formed the Triple Alliance with Austria-Hungary and Italy in 1882. In 1907, Russia, Britain, and France formed the Triple Entente. Europe was divided into two rival camps. Effects. The situation in Europe became tenser. The alliances were made in secret. This caused suspicion and fear among the powers. Moreover, the powers thought they were supported by their allies. They would not give way easily when they had quarrels with other countries. As each had allies, a small quarrel between two powers would involve more powers, leading to a major conflict and even a general war. Look at the source 9.6, the two rival camps in Europe in 1907. The Triple Alliance was formed by Austria-Hungary, Germany, and Italy in 1882. Francis Joseph I, William I, and Umberto I, from left to right, were the rulers then. The Triple Entente was formed by Russia, France, and Britain in 1907. Nicholas II, Poincaré, and Edward VII, from left to right, were their leaders then. 4. Extreme nationalism. Rise. Nationalism is the desire of people of the same race and culture to govern themselves. It became extreme in Europe in the early 20th century. Europeans supported territorial expansion to gain national glory and the use of force to solve conflicts. Extreme nationalism triggered some threatening national movements in Europe. History in depth. Nationalism to the extreme. Darwin's theory of evolution. In the mid-19th century, the British scientist Darwin proposed a biological theory, a theory of evolution. It stated that only those adapted to their natural environmental changes could survive. Impact of social Darwinism. In the late 19th century, Darwin's theory inspired a scholar, Spencer. He proposed the idea of social Darwinism, which stressed that only the superior could survive under competition. This helped justify some European countries' desire to overwhelm weaker countries and set up colonies. They wanted to establish hegemony to increase national glory, even by the use of force. The rise of social Darwinism made European nationalism extreme and aggressive. Look at the source 9.7. Darwin's theory had a great impact on Europe. Spencer's social Darwinism became the basis of extreme nationalism. Effects. Extreme nationalists supported the countries to adopt a strong foreign policy and even to wage war to achieve national goals. Extreme nationalism intensified the tensions in Europe. It also led to many crises in Africa and the Balkans. These crises worsened international relations. Examples of extreme nationalism. France. To revenge against Germany. France was determined to take revenge on Germany for its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War and to get back Alsace-Lorraine from Germany. Germany. Pan-Germanism. Pan-Germanism promoted the idea of united all Germans in Europe to build a greater Germanic empire. Some Pan-Germanists even believed that Germans were the most superior race and they hoped to conquer the world. Austria-Hungary. Expanding into the Balkans. After the 1860s, Austria-Hungary lost control of Central Europe. To regain national glory, it started to expand into the Balkans. Austria-Hungary also severely suppressed Slavic separatist activities to combat Pan-Slavism within the country. Russia, Pan-Slavism. Serbia, Greater Serbia. Russia's Pan-Slavism advocated bringing all Slavs in Europe under Russian leadership. Therefore, Russia supported Slavic states, including Serbia, to expand in the Balkans. Serbia wanted to unite the Serbians in Austria-Hungary and the Balkans to form the Greater Serbia. C. Pre-war conflicts and immediate cause. Guiding question. What was the immediate cause of the First World War? 1. The Moroccan crisis. The First Moroccan crisis, from 1905 to 1906. In 1905, Kaiser William II visited Morocco to show support for the independence of Morocco. This hindered France's plan to acquire Morocco. France, Britain, and Russia later joined together against Germany. They diplomatically defeated Germany, which was supported by Austria-Hungary only. The Second Moroccan Crisis, 1911. In 1911, France sent troops to Morocco to suppress the riots there. Germany sent a gunboat to the Moroccan port of Agadir. Britain and France were prepared to go to war with Germany. Eventually, Germany gave in. In 1912, Morocco became a French protectorate. Effects. After the first crisis, France, Britain, and Russia drew closer. They formed the Triple Entente in 1907. Germany became more hostile to Britain and France, but valued more the alliance with Austria-Hungary, its only supporter in the crisis. The Moroccan crisis further divided Europe into two rival camps and increased tensions in Europe. Look at the source 9.8, a cartoon about the Moroccan situation, published by Puck, an American magazine, in 1911. From the source. Study the source 9.8. What was the situation in Morocco in 1911, as shown in the cartoon? 2. The Bosnian Crisis. In 1908, Austria-Hungary annexed Bosnia-Herzegovina in the Balkans. Serbia was angry about this because it also wanted to get these two places. Serbia asked Russia for help. Germany supported Austria-Hungary. Europe was brought very close to war. Russia eventually advised Serbia to accept the annexation. Hostility intensified between Austria-Hungary and Serbia after the crisis. History Extra. Great diplomatic change after a coup defeat? After its independence in 1878, Serbia adopted a pro-Austrian policy. It hoped that Austria-Hungary would give it part of Bosnia-Herzegovina to meet its desire to establish a Greater Serbia. Following a coup in 1903, Peter I succeeded to the throne and changed Serbia's foreign policy to be pro-Russian and anti-Austrian. He proposed the annexation of Bosnia-Herzegovina. As a result, Austro-Serbian relations turned bad. Anti-Austrian activities in Serbia became active. 3. The Balkan Wars. The First Balkan War, 1912. In 1912, Serbia, Bulgaria, Montenegro, and Greece formed the Balkan League and declared war on the Ottoman Empire, Turkey. The Ottoman Empire was defeated and lost almost all its territories in the Balkans. Look at the source 9.9. Serbian soldiers in the Balkans Wars. The Second Balkan War, 1913. In 1913, the Balkan League split up because of territorial disputes. Bulgaria attacked Serbia and Greece. The Second Balkan War started. Bulgaria was defeated and lost most of the territories it got from the First Balkan War. Effects. Serbia's territories were greatly enlarged after the Balkan Wars. However, it failed to acquire access to the Adriatic Sea as an independent Albania, supported by Austria-Hungary, was founded. Anti-Austrian sentiment grew stronger in Serbia. Austro-Serbian relations further worsened. Look at the source 9.10, the Balkans in 1912 on the left and in 1913 on the right. From the source, study source 9.10, which Balkan state still had no access to the sea after the Balkan Wars? How was it prevented from getting an access to the Adriatic Sea? 4. Immediate cause of the war. The Sarajevo Incident, 1914. On June 28, 1914, Princip, a Bosnian student, assassinated the heir to the Austrian throne, Archduke Ferdinand, with his wife in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. Princip was associated with an anti-Austrian secret society in Serbia. Austria-Hungary accused Serbia of causing the incident. As comics say. Main points of the comics. According to what you have learned before, why could Austria-Hungary station troops in Sarajevo? Was Serbia solely responsible for the Sarajevo incident? The Sarajevo incident. 1. Princip was a Serb born in Bosnia. In 1911, he became a member of an anti-Austrian society in Serbia. In early June 1914, he and his members knew that Archduke Ferdinand would visit Sarajevo. 2. The Archduke would visit Sarajevo on Serbia's Day of National Humiliation. The anti-Serbian society felt angry and planned to assassinate him. This would arouse the nationalist feelings of the Serbs. 3. The government of Austria-Hungary learned of the plan beforehand. However, Archduke Ferdinand decided to go on as planned. 4. Archduke Ferdinand and his wife were attacked on the way to the town hall, but they arrived safely. Unfortunately, they were shot dead by Princip on the way to another destination. D. Outbreak of the war. After the Sarajevo incident, Austria-Hungary wanted to crush Serbia once and for all. With the support of Germany, Austria-Hungary sent an ultimatum to Serbia on July 23rd. It also demanded that Serbia reply to the ultimatum within 48 hours. The main terms of the ultimatum included: Serbia had to stop all anti-Austrian activities. Serbia had to dismiss all its anti-Austrian officials. Austria-Hungary would send officials to Serbia to ensure that the demands were carried out. Serbia accepted most of the terms upon the advice of Russia. However, it refused to allow Austrian officials to enter the country. When Britain failed in its attempt to mediate, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia on July 28. As other countries joined the war successively, the Austro-Serbian War became a world war. Therefore, the Sarajevo incident is seen as the immediate cause of the First World War. Look at the source 9.11. Austria had chosen war. Headline of the American newspaper, The Washington Times on July 28. History in focus. The First World War. The First World War was fought between the Central Powers and the Allied Powers. The former included Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire. The latter mainly included Britain, France, Russia, Japan, and the United States. Nevertheless, the war was mainly fought in Europe. 1. August 1914. Entry of France and Britain. Germany invaded France via Belgium, which was a neutral country. France declared war on Germany. Britain also felt threatened by the German invasion of Belgium, so it decided to join the war. 2. February 1915. Unrestricted submarine warfare. German submarines started to attack ships sailing to Britain, including those from neutral countries. A German submarine sank the British ship Lusitania and killed many American passengers. 3. May 1915. Entry of Italy. The Allied powers promised to give lands to Italy if it joined the war against the Central Powers. In May, Italy joined the war on the side of the Allied powers, but its entry did not cause any breakthrough in the war situation. 4. April 1917. Entry of the United States. In March, Germany asked Mexico to form an alliance against the United States. The United States ended its neutrality and declared war on the Central Powers. The entry of the United States greatly strengthened the economic and military power of the Allied powers. 5. January 1918. The 14 points. American President Wilson issued the 14 points, including the establishment of an international peacekeeping organization. It aimed to be a blueprint for maintaining long-term peace after the war. 6. March 1918. Russian withdrawal. In November 1917, October by the Russian calendar, Lenin set up a communist government in Russia. In March 1918, Russia signed a treaty with Germany and withdrew from the war. 7. November 1918. Defeat of the Central Powers. The entry of the United States broke the stalemate of the war. The Allied powers started to counterattack. The Central Powers surrendered to the Allied powers one by one from September to November in 1918. The 4-year-long First World War ended. I have participated in around 80 battles. I have found your American army the most honorable of all our enemies. You have also been the bravest of our enemies. General Karl Worl Einem, commander of the 3rd German Army, commanding the American soldiers after surrender. Think about it. What was the most important reason for American entry into the First World War? Some historians say that the American entry changed the course of the First World War. Do you agree? Historical skills. Study political cartoons. 1. Forms of political cartoons. Cartoons are important sources for studying 19th and 20th century Western history. They were mainly about political issues. These cartoons could be found in newspapers and magazines such as the American Washington Post and the British Punch. Governments would also invite cartoonists to draw propaganda posters and postcards. 2. Interpretation of political cartoons. Political cartoons aim to explain history through drawings. They include cartoonists' personal views. Government propaganda posters may even have a biased sense. Nevertheless, these cartoons are still useful historical sources. 2. The Second World War. Guiding question: what were the background and causes of the Second World War? A. International situation after the First World War. Post-war problems cast a shadow over the prospect of peace. For example, faced with post-war social and economic problems, Britain and France were unable and unwilling to intervene in European affairs. The governments of Germany and Italy lost support as people were dissatisfied with the post-war arrangements. As post-war problems continued to trouble Europe, coupled with the economic crisis of the late 1920s, the international situation underwent a drastic change. Germany, Italy, and Japan all started invasions, intensifying the threat of another world war. Look at the source 9.12. International situation in focus after the First World War. 1. Discontent of Germany and Italy. The defeated Germany signed the harsh Treaty of Versailles. Germans were very angry about it. The victorious Italians failed to get the lands promised by the Allied powers. They accused their government of incompetence. 2. Japan's rapid expansion. During the First World War, Japan signed a secret treaty with Britain, France, and the United States to ensure that its interests in Asia were not threatened. After the war, Japan's rapid expansion into China and the Pacific region alarmed the Americans. 3. Weakened Britain and France, the isolationist United States. Britain and France suffered serious losses and the process of reconstruction was slow. Though the United States was a major decision-maker in the post-war peace conference, it quickly returned to its isolationist policy. B. Failure of the Paris Peace Conference 1919. 1. Calling of Paris Peace Conference. In 1919, the victorious countries held the Paris Peace Conference to discuss the peace settlement. Leaders of the United States, Britain, and France dominated the conference. They were known as the Big Three. The defeated countries were not invited to the conference or consulted about the peace terms. They signed separate peace treaties between 1919 and 1920 and were punished. Germany was punished most heavily. Look at the source 9.13, the Big Three and their aims. Wilson, American president, to maintain world peace. Proposed the 14 points as basis for the peace settlement. Opposed Spanish and Germany heavily in order not to deepen the enmity among the powers. Clemenceau, French Prime Minister, to weaken Germany permanently. Demanded Germany return the French land gained in the Franco-Prussian War. Demanded harsh punishment on Germany in order to weaken Germany permanently. Lloyd George, British Prime Minister, to maintain a balance of power. Wanted to maintain a balance of power and did not want to see Germany weakened too much. Wanted to take over German colonies and maintain Britain's naval supremacy. 2. Major settlements. Signing the Treaty of Versailles, June 1919. According to the treaty, Germany had to disarm, pay reparations, and cede some land. It also had to accept the war guilt clause, bearing full responsibility for causing the war. Achieving national self-determination. In accordance with the principle of national self-determination, see page 50, the defeated countries ceded territories to peoples of Eastern Europe. New independent nation-states such as Hungary and Czechoslovakia were established, forming a collective security system. President Wilson's proposal to form an international peacekeeping body was adopted. In 1920, the League of Nations was set up. It aimed to maintain peace through collective security. Countries would take collective actions to solve international conflicts. See page 40. History decoded. Collective security. Under collective security, countries pledged to resolve disputes through peace talks and arbitration, instead of waging war. When a country is being attacked, countries would join together to stop the aggression. Other than setting up the League, countries also signed international conventions and held disarmament conferences in the interwar period. These aimed to prevent the outbreak of conflicts so as to achieve collective security. 3. Discontent of Italy and Germany. Italy failed to get all the land promised. Italy did not get all the land promised by the Allied powers at the Paris Peace Conference. The Italians felt betrayed by their allies and blamed the government for being unable to protect national interest. They wanted to have a strong leader to bring national glory. Germany punished too harshly. The Germans felt that the Treaty of Versailles was harsh, and it was unfair for Germany to accept the war guilt clause. They wanted to take revenge and were discontented with their Weimar Republic government. They longed for a strong leader to overthrow the treaty and rebuild national glory. 4. Hidden dangers in national self-determination. Most new Eastern European countries were weak. They easily became targets for expansion. These countries were founded according to the principle of national self-determination, but the populations still included other peoples. For example, 3 million Germans lived in the Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia. This became an excuse for Germany's expansion. Look at the source 9.14. In September 1919, the Italian nationalist leader Annunzio occupied the Yugoslav city of Fiume. The majority of the city's population were Italians. Look at the source 9.15. A British cartoon about the Treaty of Versailles, published in 1921. From the source. Study source 9.15. What was the view of the cartoonist on the Treaty of Versailles? Data-based question 1. Aim: to understand the impact of the Treaty of Versailles on Germany. Level 3. Interpreting sources and using own knowledge and understanding. Study the source below and answer the questions that follow. Source: the main terms of the Treaty of Versailles. The German army was reduced to 100,000. No tanks, submarines, or fighter planes were allowed. The Rhineland would become a demilitarized zone. Had to give up all its colonies. Had to cede 13% of its land to neighboring countries. Had to pay reparations amounting to £6.6 billion over 42 years. Had to accept the war guilt clause. Germany and Austria were forbidden to be unified. C. Economic problems in the interwar period. 1. Economic downturn after the First World War. The European countries faced severe economic and social problems after the First World War. Unemployment rates rose due to economic stagnation and a large number of demobilized soldiers. There was a shortage of resources as production facilities and infrastructure were damaged. Serious inflation and famine occurred. After the war, the European countries did not cooperate to solve the economic crisis. They even restricted foreign trade to protect their own industries. Britain, France, and Germany could only rely on American loans to stimulate their economies. The foreign trade of Asian countries like Japan was also adversely affected. The economic downturn sowed the seeds on the rise of totalitarianism in some countries. History in depth. Hyperinflation in Germany in the early 1920s. What is inflation? A continuous increase in the supply of money will devalue the currency. As the purchasing power of the money decreases, prices will increase correspondingly and inflation results. Hyperinflation refers to prices going out of control and increasing very quickly. Hyperinflation in Germany in the early 1920s. After the First World War, the Weimar Republic issued a large amount of banknotes. Hyperinflation thus occurred between 1921 and 1923. Large-scale demonstration continued and some organizations attempted to overthrow the government. In 1924, the Weimar government issued a new currency and stopped printing large amounts of banknotes. The problem of hyperinflation was gradually resolved. Look at the source 9.16. Hyperinflation in Germany in 1923. Banknotes became toys for children above, and even waste paper below. 2. The Great Depression from 1929 to 1933. The Wall Street Crash. Between 1919 and 1929, the economy of the United States was booming. Industrialists borrowed lots of money from banks and invested heavily in the stock market. People also speculated actively. Share prices continued to rise. In October 1929, a massive sell-off of stocks caused a sharp drop in stock prices. The stock market crashed. Many investors lost all their money. About 100,000 companies closed down and employment reached 13 million. The United States entered a period called the Great Depression. Spread of the Great Depression. The United States was the major creditor and financier of Europe. To save its economy, the United States demanded the repayment of loans. This hit the European economy very badly. Moreover, the United States protected its domestic production by imposing high tariffs and quotas on imported goods. As the American demand for foreign goods fell greatly, many European and Japanese factories closed down. Unemployment rose sharply. Look at the source 9.17. Long queues of people seeking jobs or waiting for free meals in the United States during the Great Depression. The Great Depression also had a great impact on the global economy. There was also a saying that when America sneezes, the world catches a cold. Impact of the Great Depression. The Great Depression weakened the determination and ability of the international community to maintain peace. It also fueled the rise of totalitarianism. Impact on the United States. The United States focused on rebuilding its economy and became more self-isolated. In the 1930s, it passed several neutrality acts to prevent involvement in international conflicts. Impact on Britain and France. Britain and France were badly hit. Their social and economic problems became more serious. They were reluctant to use force to deal with the international disputes. Aggressors took advantage of this. Impact on Germany and Japan. The Great Depression caused an economic slump in Germany. Germans started to support Hitler and his Nazi Party. Similarly, the Great Depression sharply increased the unemployment rate in Japan. Japanese militarists proposed territorial expansion to solve economic problems. Their ideas became popular. Look at the source 9.18. Relationship between unemployment rate and Nazi votes in elections from 1928 to 1933. From the source. Study the source 9.18. What was the relationship between Germany's unemployment rate and Nazi support rate? D. Rise of totalitarianism. 1. What is totalitarianism? Totalitarianism refers to an ideology or a political system. In a totalitarian state, the ruler holds total authority over the state and controls all aspects of public and private life. 2. Reasons for the rise of totalitarianism. After the First World War, political and social instability troubled many European countries and weakened people's faith in democracy. The Germans and Italians were discontented with the decisions of the Paris Peace Conference. They longed for a strong government that could revive the country's past glories. This led to the rise of fascism and Nazism in the two countries. In Japan, as the party government was weak, the militarists were able to control the government in the 1930s. Look at the source 9.19. Comparison of the totalitarian and democratic systems in Europe in the 1930s. Difference in governance. A totalitarian ruler governed according to his own will. A democratic government ruled according to the laws and will of the people. Power and responsibility. Power was highly concentrated in the hands of totalitarian ruler, without checks and balances. In democracy, there were a separation of power and a system of checks and balances. Political parties. Totalitarian parties adopted a one-party system where opposition was eliminated. In democracy, people were free to form parties with different political views and to participate in democratic elections. People's rights. In totalitarianism, secret police were set up to watch over the people and the media were strictly censored. In democracy, people enjoyed freedom of speech and of the press. Foreign policy. In totalitarianism, they generally advocated racial supremacy and the glory of the nation and the leader. They supported foreign expansion. In democracy, they adopted an appeasement policy in the face of economic, political, and social problems in the country. 3. Totalitarianism in Italy. Fascism. Rise of fascism. As Italy failed to get all the land promised by the Allied powers, the Italians criticized their government for its weaknesses. The government also failed to solve the post-war economic and social problems. The Italians lost confidence in democracy and hoped for a strong leader and government. This provided an opportunity for the rise of Mussolini and his fascist party. Establishment of the fascist regime. In 1921, Mussolini founded the fascist party. In 1922, he became prime minister. All political parties were banned except the fascist party. By 1928, Mussolini established fascist dictatorial rule in Italy. Look at the source 9.20. The fascist symbol. The fasces had its origin in ancient Rome. Mussolini used it to symbolize power, the axe, and the unity of the people, the bound bundle of wooden rods. History headline. Mussolini benefits from the March on Rome. October 28, 1922. On October 22, 1922, Mussolini called upon 30,000 fascists to march on Rome and announced that there would be a coup to take over the government. At the time, Italian King Victor Emmanuel III had also lost confidence in democratic government, and the army kept neutral towards the march on Rome. But interestingly, Mussolini was staying in Milan preparing to flee during the operation as he feared that his plan might fail. At last, the fascists were allowed to enter Rome and Mussolini was appointed as prime minister on October 29. Features of fascist rule in Italy. 1. One-party dictatorship. All political parties were banned except the fascist party. 2. Absolute obedience. Mussolini demanded that all people should work for the interests of the country and obey the state absolutely. 3. Total control and repression. The state controlled people's daily life, work, and education. It also set up secret police to monitor the people. 4. Cult of personality. The fascist party promoted the cult of Mussolini. As the basic government slogan went, Mussolini is always right. 5. Anti-communism. Communists believed in the idea of class struggle. Mussolini believed that this idea would weaken unity among the people and even national strength. He suppressed socialist and communist activities in Italy. 6. Economic self-sufficiency. Mussolini hoped to reduce Italy's economic reliance on foreign countries in order to protect the country's interests. 7. Military and territorial expansion. Mussolini greatly expanded Italian military forces and armaments. Under his leadership, Italy actively expanded its territories in order to revive the glory of ancient Rome. 4. Totalitarianism in Germany. Nazism. Rise of Nazism. The Weimar Republic, established in 1918, was unpopular from the start as it signed the Treaty of Versailles. During the Great Depression, the unemployment population rose to over 6 million in Germany. The Germans lost confidence in the democratic government. At the time, Hitler promised jobs and the overthrow of the Treaty of Versailles. This helped him and his Nazi party gain mass support. Establishment of the Nazi regime. In 1932, the Nazi party became the largest party in the German parliament. In 1933, Hitler became chancellor. In 1934, he became both chancellor and the president and got absolute power. He banned other political parties and established a one-party dictatorship. Look at the source 9.21. The swastika was the symbol of the Nazi party. History in depth. Rise of Hitler. From a soldier to a politician. Hitler served in a German army during First World War. After the war, he joined an extreme nationalist party, the German Workers' Party. The party was reorganized as the Nazi Party in 1920, and Hitler became its leader in 1921. A rapidly rising political star. In 1923, Hitler and his followers staged an attempted coup known as the Beer Hall Putsch in a beer hall in Munich to overthrow the Weimar Republic. The coup ended in failure. Though Hitler was imprisoned, he became famous. After being released, he built up Nazi support among the Germans through his skilled oratory and charisma. Look at the source 9.22. Even though Hitler was sentenced to 5 years in prison, he was released in December 1924 on the right. Thus, Hitler was only able to finish the first volume of Mein Kampf above in prison, which was published in 1925. Features of Nazi rule in Germany. 1. One-party dictatorship. All political parties were banned except the Nazi Party. 2. Total control and oppression. The state controlled people's daily life, work, and education. It also set up secret police to monitor the people. 3. Cult of personality. Hitler was called Führer, meaning leader. The Nazi Party strictly controlled the media and promoted the cult of Hitler. He was glorified as a heroic leader. 4. Anti-Semitism. The Nazis believed that the Aryan race, ancestors of the Germans, was superior to all other races and should rule other races. They advocated exterminating the Jews in order to preserve the purity of the Aryan race. During the reign of the Nazis, about 6 million Jews died under different kinds of Nazi persecution. 5. Anti-communism. Hitler believed that the communist idea of class struggle would weaken unity among the people and even national strength. Therefore, the Nazis suppressed all communist activities in Germany. 6. Military and territorial expansion. In order to get living space for its growing population, Hitler expanded German military forces and armaments. Germany expanded in Europe step by step, aiming to establish a greater German empire. 5. Totalitarianism in Japan. Militarism. Rise of militarism. Militarism is a belief in military power. It advocates expansion to protect or strive for national interests. Japan had been ruled by the warrior class for a long time. Military spirit was deeply rooted. After the First World War, power struggles and corruption in Japan's party government were rampant. It also failed to solve the economic crisis brought by the Great Depression in the 1930s. Many Japanese began to support the militarists and territorial expansion to solve difficulties. Establishment of militarist regime. In 1931, the Japanese army invaded Manchuria in China and later set up the puppet state Manchukuo. This made militarism more popular. In 1932, the party government fell. The militarists gained power and established a military dictatorship. Look at the source 9.23. The rising sun flag was originally a war flag used by the Japanese army, but later came to symbolize Japanese militarism. History in depth. Loopholes in Japan's constitutional system before the Second World War. Although Japan adopted the Meiji Constitution in 1889, democracy did not take root in Japan. There were loopholes in the constitution which sowed the seeds of the rise of militarism. Under the Meiji Constitution, the emperor was the head of state with great power. Furthermore, the Meiji Constitution established the military as an independent political force. It was not controlled by the cabinet and even had the power to obstruct the formation of the cabinet. The Constitution allowed the military to control the cabinet soon after the fall of party government, and step by step, the military set up a military dictatorship. Look at the source 9.24. Japanese Emperor Showa riding a white horse, inspecting the army in 1938. Features of militarist rule in Japan. 1. Military dictatorship. From 1932, the military controlled the cabinet and set up a military dictatorship step by step. All opposition to its rule was silenced by force. 2. Control over thoughts and emperor worship. To unite the Japanese people, the military government promoted an emperor-centered nationalism. Military rule brought control over thoughts and ideas. School textbooks were used to promote war and emperor worship. 3. Anti-communism. Japanese communists advocated class struggle and abolition of the tenno system. Japanese militarists believed that these ideas would weaken unity among the people and even destroy national tradition. 4. Military and territorial expansion. Japan's expansion aimed to get territories for its surplus population and markets for its industries. Japan intensified its expansions in China and Southeast Asia. 5. State control. Since the military government started its full-scale invasion of China in 1937, it controlled all resources and economic activities in the state. The whole nation was mobilized to support the war effort. Civilians were also given military training. E. Aggressions of the totalitarian countries in the 1930s. In the interwar period, totalitarian rule was established in Italy, Germany, and Japan. In the 1930s, they actively expanded in Europe, Asia, and Africa, leading to many international crises. Look at Italy's expansion in Africa. From October 1935 to May 1936, Italy invaded Abyssinia in northeastern Africa. Italy annexed Abyssinia in the end. In March 1936, German troops entered the demilitarized Rhineland, violating the Treaty of Versailles. In March 1938, Germany forced Austria to accept a union with it, violating the Treaty of Versailles. September 1938, Germany occupied the Sudetenland, the northwestern part of Czechoslovakia. Japan's expansion in Asia. September 18, 1931. Shenyang Incident. Japanese troops invaded the northeast provinces of China. January 1932. Shanghai Incident. Japanese troops attacked Shanghai. Under the mediation of Britain, the United States and France, China and Japan signed an armistice. March 1932. Japan set up Manchukuo, a puppet state, in northeastern China. July 7, 1937. Lugoqiao Incident. Japanese troops invaded Beijing. Full-scale invasion of China started. F. Formation of the Axis powers. 1. Agreements among the totalitarian states from 1936 to 1939. In 1936, Germany and Japan concluded the Anti-Comintern Pact to defend against the threat of the Communist Soviet Union. Italy signed the pact in 1937. In May 1939, Germany and Italy formed a military alliance with the signing a Pact of Steel. They promised to support each other in a possible war. 2. Signing of the Tripartite Pact in 1940. In September 1940, Germany, Italy, and Japan signed the Tripartite Pact, forming the military alliance of the Berlin-Rome-Tokyo Axis. In Second World War, the Axis powers fought against the Allied powers. History in depth, from Anti-Comintern Pact to Tripartite Pact. Between 1936 and 1937, Japan, Italy, and Germany agreed to resist Soviet invasion and signed the Anti-Comintern Pact. However, Germany and Italy later formed a military alliance, excluding Japan. In August 1939, Germany further signed the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact with the Soviet Union. Japan was angry and ended discussions on forming a military alliance with Germany. At the start of the Second World War, Germany and Japan made up and signed the Tripartite Pact with Italy. G. Attempts at collective security and their failure. 1. Setbacks of the League of Nations. League of Nations and collective security. At its peak, the League had 58 member countries, but the United States never joined. The League worked to maintain world peace through collective security. Its member countries would collectively mediate, impose sanctions, or take military action to stop aggression. Failure of the League in the 1930s. In the 1920s, the League settled many disputes between its members. However, it failed to handle the expansions of the totalitarian countries in the 1930s. Japan and Italy intensified their aggressions and withdrew from the League successively. The failure of the League to stop Japan and Italy encouraged Germany to speed up its expansion. Member countries also lost their faith in collective security. When Britain and France adopted an appeasement policy towards the totalitarian countries, the League existed in name only. Look at the source 9.25, a League of Nations flag. Look at the source 9.26, failures of the League of Nations in the 1930s, and a British cartoon published in 1935. Failure of the League. Japan. In 1931, Japan invaded northeast China. The League condemned the Japanese aggression and urged it to withdraw. Japan ignored the demand and left the League in 1933. Germany. In 1932, the League convened to Geneva Disarmament Conference. When Hitler rose to power in 1933, Germany left both the Disarmament Conference and the League. Italy. In 1935, Italy invaded Abyssinia. The League condemned the Italian invasion and imposed economic sanctions, but failed to gain support from its members. In 1936, Italy occupied Abyssinia, and it left the League the next year. From the source. Study the source 9.26. What problems of the League of Nations does the cartoon reflect? 2. Appeasement policy of Britain and France. Reasons for adopting appeasement. Appeasement is a policy of making concessions to an aggressor state in order to prevent war. Britain and France wanted to focus on solving internal problems. They were also not strong enough to make military interventions. They therefore adopted an appeasement policy in the 1930s. They conceded to the territorial demands of the totalitarian states in exchange for peace. Appeasement towards Japan and Italy. Britain and France did not take real action to stop Japan's invasion of northeast China in 1931. In the face of Italy's invasion of Abyssinia in 1935, they even agreed secretly to allow Italy to occupy 2/3 of Abyssinia. Moreover, they also refused to enforce the League's sanctions on Italy. Appeasement toward Germany. Between 1936 and 1938, Germany sent troops into the Rhineland and annexed Austria. Britain and France took no action in response. In May 1938, Hitler demanded that Czechoslovakia give up the Sudetenland to Germany. To prevent war, Britain and France signed the Munich Agreement with Germany, allowing Germany to occupy the Sudetenland. Look at the source 9.27. On September 29, 1938, British Prime Minister Chamberlain arrived in Germany for the Munich conference below and returned to Britain the next day declaring "Peace for our time" above. As comics say, the Munich Agreement. Main point of the comics. What was the policy adopted by Britain and France towards Germany's expansion, as reflected in the Munich Agreement? 1. After 1935, Hitler first rearmed Germany, then sent troops to the Rhineland and forced Austria to accept a union with Germany. 2. In early 1938, Hitler set his eye on the Sudetenland, where 3 million Germans lived. The Nazis stirred the people in the Sudetenland to demand union with Germany. Hitler announced that Germany would go to war in support of justice. 3. In September 1938, British Prime Minister Chamberlain and the leaders of France and Italy met with Hitler in Munich. Czechoslovakia was not invited to the meeting. 4. The four leaders agreed to give the Sudetenland to Germany. Chamberlain was welcomed by the people when he came home. They believed that the Munich Agreement had brought peace. 5. Benias felt betrayed, but he could do nothing. Stalin was angry that he had not been invited to the Munich conference. He also felt worried about the isolation of the Soviet Union. 6. The Munich Agreement could only make Hitler more ambitious, as he believed that Britain and France would avoid war at all costs. In March 1939, Germany took over the whole of Czechoslovakia and it invaded Poland in September. The Second World War broke out. 3. Isolationism of the United States. After the Paris Peace Conference, the United States returned to isolationism and did not join the League of Nations. The Great Depression deepened its isolationist stance. In 1935, it passed the First Neutrality Act, prohibiting the export of arms to any nations at war. It only condemned the aggressions of Italy and Germany. American isolationism encouraged totalitarian aggression. 4. The Soviet Union drawn closer to Germany. The Communist Soviet Union, established in 1922, was not trusted by the Western countries. It was not invited to the Munich Conference. Stalin, the Soviet leader, doubted that Britain and France planned to play Germany against the Soviet Union. When the formation of an anti-German alliance between Britain and France locked in a stalemate, the Soviet Union drew closer to Germany. In 1939, the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact was signed. Germany and the Soviet Union agreed secretly to divide Poland and their spheres of influence in Eastern Europe. The pact removed the main obstacle to German expansion eastward and further aroused its ambition to invade Poland. Look at the source 9.29. German and Soviet representatives signed the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact in Moscow on August 23, 1939. History headline: No Eternal Enemies. Cooperation and Partition. August 23, 1939. Nazi Germany was anti-communist, while the Soviet Union supported the German communists against Nazi rule. Because of this ideological difference and their conflicts over Eastern Europe, Nazi-Soviet relations were hostile. However, the situation changed in early 1939. After annexing Czechoslovakia, see page 42, Germany feared that the Soviet Union might stop its annexation of Poland. It also wanted to avoid a two-front war in the West against Britain and France and the East against the Soviet Union. Furthermore, the Soviet Union felt threatened by the eastward expansion of Germany. It also suspected that Britain and France aimed to divert the war to Eastern Europe. As a result, Germany and the Soviet Union signed the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. In fact, both of them knew that a war between the two countries was inevitable. The pact was only an armistice. Data-based question 2. Aim: to understand the appeasement policy of Britain and France. Level 3. Interpreting sources and using own knowledge and understanding. Study the source below and answer the questions that follow. Source: a British cartoon published in September 1938. Santa Claus said, "Europe can look forward to a Christmas of peace." Historical skill: explaining views. A view refers to a person's opinion on someone or something. For example, did the cartoonist think that Santa Claus was going to keep his promise or not? That the promise of Santa Claus could be kept or not? We then support our answer with clues, evidence from the source. H. Events and immediate cause leading to the war. Guiding question: what was the immediate cause of the Second World War? 1. Further expansion of Germany and Italy, March-April 1939. In March 1939, Germany occupied the whole of Czechoslovakia. In April, Italy occupied Albania. Britain and France then abandoned their appeasement policy. They promised to protect the independence of Poland and countries threatened by aggression, and accelerated armaments programs. 2. The immediate cause: German invasion of Poland, September 1939. Since 1938, Germany had demanded that Poland return the land it got from Germany by the Treaty of Versailles. Poland refused, and thus Germany prepared to invade Poland. Hitler believed that Britain and France would not go to war for Poland. Furthermore, the signing of the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact encouraged Germany to take action without fear of Soviet intervention. On September 1, 1939, it attacked Poland. Britain and France demanded its withdrawal, but received no response. They declared war on Germany. The Second World War began. Look at the source 9.29, Europe in August 1939. History in focus. The Second World War. The Second World War was fought between the Axis powers and the Allied powers. Germany, Italy, and Japan were the major Axis powers. The Allied powers mainly comprised Britain, France, the United States, the Soviet Union, and China. The war was fought on a large scale than the First World War. There was fighting in Europe, Africa, and Asia. 1. September 1939. Occupation of Poland. Germany adopted the Blitzkrieg strategy, a German word meaning lightning warfare, a mobile tactic combining the air force and armored units, and successfully occupied Poland within less than a month. 2. April-June 1940. Fall of Western and Northern Europe. Germany occupied Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. 370,000 Allied soldiers decided to retreat from mainland Europe to Britain. 3. August 1940. Italian invasion of North Africa. In June 1940, Italy entered the war and invaded North Africa, extending the war to Africa. However, Britain made a counterattack against Italy. Hitler had to send troops to help his ally in Africa. 4. June 1941. German invasion of the Soviet Union. Germany adopted the Blitzkrieg strategy against the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union suffered heavy casualties because the army was ill-equipped. Although German troops captured a lot of Soviet land, Germany could not defeat the Soviet Union. 5. December 1941. Entry of the United States. On December 7, December 8 in Asia, 1941, Japanese troops made a sudden attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The United States declared war on Japan, and the Pacific War started. 6. 1942, 1944. Allied counteroffensives. In 1942, the United States defeated Japan in sea battles. In February 1943, Soviet forces launched a counterattack against German troops. In July, the fascist regime in Italy was overthrown. In 1944, Allied troops landed in Normandy, France, and started liberating European countries from Nazi rule. 7. August 1945. End of the Second World War. When Soviet troops took Berlin on April 30, 1945, Germany surrendered. The United States dropped 2 powerful atomic bombs on Japan. Finally, Japan surrendered on August 15, marking the end of the 6-year-long war. When you have to deal with a beast, you have to treat him as a beast. American President Truman defending the use of atomic bombs. Think about it. Which country did Truman refer to as a beast? What method did he suggest using to deal with the beast? Three. Summary. Was the Second World War a continuation of the First World War? Guiding questions. Did the peace conference after the First World War completely settle the international disputes and post-war economic problems? What threats to peace did the post-war settlements leave behind? How did the post-war problems weaken the capability of Western countries to maintain peace? The 2 world wars in the first half of the 20th centuries were closely related. In the early 20th century, the rise of extreme nationalism made the European powers aggressive. Conflicts were frequent and finally provoked the First World War. However, the end of the war and post-war peace talks did not completely resolve the conflicts among the powers. Some post-war settlements even sowed the seeds of conflicts. For example, Germans and Italians' desire for revenge. In the 1920s and 1930s, post-war problems and the Great Depression weakened the collective security system. Totalitarian regimes rose and expanded. The other powers refused to stop their aggression as they did not want to be involved in a world war again. The German invasion of Poland finally crossed the red line for Britain and France and ended the 20-year truce. The Second World War began. Let's look at the steps. 1. Problem left behind by First World War. Discontent of Germany and Italy with the post-war settlements. The new nation-states became easy targets of aggression. Post-war economic downturn. 2. Desire for revenge and discontent shook the foundations of democracy. Italy was the first country to establish a totalitarian government. 3. The Great Depression caused economic problems and prompted the establishment of totalitarian governments in Germany and Japan. 4. In the 1930s, the totalitarian countries launched aggressions. Germany called for overthrow of the Treaty of Versailles. 5. Responses of other major powers. Britain and France adopted a policy of appeasement. The United States adopted isolationism. The Soviet Union drew closer to Germany. 6. The responses of the powers encouraged further aggressions. Finally, continuous aggressions led to the outbreak of the Second World War. History in depth. Treatment of defeated Germany. After the First World War, Germany was punished severely. Germany's resentment against its post-war treatment led to the rise of Nazism, which was the main cause of the outbreak of the Second World War. In the latter stages of the Second World War, the Allied powers held conferences to discuss post-war settlements. They decided to prevent desires for revenge. The settlement for Germany was laid at the Yalta Conference and Potsdam Conference. It avoided severe punishment but paved the way for the division of Germany later. See Topic 10. Settlement for Germany after the First World War. The Treaty of Decision was the Treaty of Versailles. Main consideration was to severely punish and weaken Germany. The main contents: territorial aspect, ceded land to neighboring nations, gave up all its colonies. Military aspect, army reduced to 100,000. Tanks, submarines, and fighter planes banned. The Rhineland became a demilitarized zone. Reparations, ordered to pay £6.6 billion over 42 years in reparations. Other aspects, had to accept the war guilt clause, bearing full responsibility for causing the war. Effects, there were Germans in the ceded territories. They became excuses for Nazi aggression. The Germans were very discontented with the harsh reparations and the war guilt clause. It paved the way for Germany to become a totalitarian state and take revenge. Settlement for Germany after the Second World War. Decisions of the Yalta and Potsdam conferences. To reduce hatred and impose appropriate punishment. Territorial aspect. Returned all territories occupied before and during the war. Ceded land to neighboring nations. Germany and its capital Berlin were each divided into 4 zones occupied by the US, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Military aspect, carried out demilitarization. Reparations, paid its industrial products and raw materials. Other aspects, prosecuted Nazi war criminals and carried out denazification. Sent the Germans living in Poland and Czechoslovakia back to Germany. The Germans living abroad were repatriated. This helped prevent disputes. Germany was not overly weakened. This helped reduce hatred and prevent the revival of Nazism. Germany was divided into occupation zones, paving the way for the long-term division of East and West Germany. C. Decolonization of Asia and Africa and the rise of the Third World in the post-war period. Guiding questions. How did the 2 world wars lead to decolonization? How did the independence of Asian and African colonies and the rise of the Third World change the international situation? 1. Decolonization of Asia and Africa after the Second World War. After the First World War, newly independent nation-states were established in Eastern Europe. Asian and African colonial nationalists were encouraged. As decolonization started after the Second World War, the world entered the era of modern nation-states. A. Background. 1. Impact of the First World War. Birth of the idea of decolonization. Principle of national self-determination. This principle claims that a group of people with a common language and culture have the right to form their own state and choose their own government. In 1918, American President Wilson issued the 14 points. He proposed the principle of national self-determination to give peoples in Eastern Europe the chance to develop autonomy and a guarantee of independence. Points about national self-determination in the 14 points. The peoples of Austria-Hungary should be given the chance of autonomous development. The international community should guarantee the political and economic independence and territorial integrity of the Balkan states. non-Turkish peoples in the Ottoman Empire should be given the chance of autonomous development. An independent Polish state should be established with an international guarantee of its political and economic independence and territorial integrity. Encouragement from Eastern European peoples. After the Paris Peace Conference, more than 10 new nation-states were formed in Eastern Europe. Their establishment put the principle of national self-determination into practice. This encouraged colonial nationalists in Asia and Africa and gave birth to the idea of decolonization. However, Western colonial powers refused to accept their independence at that time. 2. Impact of the Second World War. Decline of the European colonial powers. After the Second World War, the European colonial powers further declined. They were unable to restore or maintain colonial rule. Their colonies in Asia and Africa eventually gained independence through negotiations or wars. B. Decolonization of Asia. During the Second World War, Japan occupied the colonies of Western countries in Southeast Asia, further stimulating nationalism in the region. After the war, these colonies resisted the resumption of colonial rule by their former suzerains. Anti-colonialism also ran high in British India and South Asia. History in depth. Impact of the Japanese occupation of Southeast Asia. During its occupation of Southeast Asia, Japan proposed the idea of Asia for Asians and supported the independence of certain regions. This stimulated nationalism in Southeast Asia. Nevertheless, the oppressive Japanese rule disappointed the Southeast Asians. They became disillusioned with the Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. They decided to achieve national self-determination with their own strength. Nationalism ran high in Southeast Asia. Look at the source 9.30. During the Second World War, Japan advocated the rise of Asia, above. It invited Asian countries to attend the Greater East Asia Conference, below, emphasizing that Japan would liberate them from colonial rule. Decolonization in Asia developed rapidly during the late 1940s and the 1950s. The colonies gained their independence through the suzerain's assistance, negotiation, and armed struggle. Look at the source 9.31. 3 ways for colonies to gain independence. Suzerain's assistance, negotiation, armed struggle. 1. American colony, through the suzerain's assistance. In the 1930s, the United States introduced reforms in the Philippines and passed the Philippine Independence Act, 1934, to provide for the adoption of a constitution and establishment of a new government. In 1935, the Commonwealth of the Philippines, led by an elected president, was established. In 1946, the Philippines became independent. 2. British colonies, through negotiation. Britain was relatively moderate towards its colonies after the Second World War. The colonies gained independence through negotiation, and their process was relatively peaceful. Burma. Soon after restoring its rule in Burma, Britain held talks with the independence leader Aung San to end colonial rule. In 1947, the two sides reached an agreement and the Union of Burma was founded in 1948. Look at the source 9.32. A photo of Aung San above and Burmese people holding a portrait of him right. As the Premier of British Burma, Aung San successfully negotiated independence from Britain after the Second World War. He was honored as the father of the nation. India and Pakistan. After the Second World War, the Indian leader Gandhi negotiated with Britain to gain independence. At the same time, differences between the Hindus and the Muslims intensified. According to the Indian Independence Act, passed in 1947, British India would be divided into Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan. In August, India and Pakistan became independent. Malaya and Singapore. Malayan leader Tunku Abdul Rahman and Chinese leader Lee Kuan Yew advocated peaceful means to gain independence from Britain. In 1957, Malaya and Singapore became autonomous. In 1963, Malaya, Singapore, and other former British colonies formed Malaysia. The population of Singapore was Chinese majority while people in other parts of Malaysia were mainly Malays. Political and economic differences and ethnic conflicts in Malaysia became increasingly serious. In 1965, Lee Kuan Yew announced Singapore's independence from Malaysia. Brunei. In 1959, Brunei gained autonomy. In 1979, Britain agreed to help Brunei prepare for independence in a 5-year transition period. In 1984, Brunei declared independence. Look at the source 9.33. Independence movement leaders of India, Pakistan, Malaya and Singapore, Gandhi, Jinnah, Tunku Abdul Rahman, and Lee Kuan Yew, from left to right. From the source. Study the identities of the independence movement leaders in source 9.33. Infer why 4 independent countries were founded in South Asia and Southeast Asia. (3) French and Dutch colonies through armed struggle. After the Second World War, France and the Netherlands attempted to restore their colonial rule in Southeast Asia by force. French Indochina and the Dutch East Indies then started armed struggles for independence. French Indochina, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. After the Second World War, nationalists in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia organized armed forces against French rule. Between 1953 and 1954, France suffered military setbacks and had to recognize their independence. However, due to the outbreak of a civil war, Vietnam was divided into 2 until reunification in 1976. Dutch East Indies, Indonesia. In 1945, the nationalist leader Sukarno proclaimed the independence of Indonesia. Armed conflicts broke out between the Dutch and the Indonesians. In 1949, the Netherlands finally agreed to end its rule in Indonesia. In 1950, Indonesia formally gained independence. Look at the source 9.34. Dutch flag being lowered by the Indonesian government above, and an overview of decolonization in Asia below. C. Decolonization of Africa. During the Second World War, the Allied powers gathered supplies from Africa. After the war, Africans believed that the suzerains should give them more rights in return. Decolonization began. New nation-states emerged successively. The year 1960 was called the Year of Africa. 1. Independence of Egypt and decline of British colonial power. In 1922, Egypt became autonomous, but its military and foreign affairs were still controlled by Britain. After the Second World War, Egyptian nationalists demanded full independence and the withdrawal of British troops from Egypt. In 1952, Nasser, an Egyptian officer, overthrew the pro-Western Egyptian king in a coup. In 1956, Britain agreed to withdraw from Egypt. Egypt became completely independent. In the same year, Egypt gained control of the Suez Canal from Britain. The decline of Britain accelerated the decolonization of its African colonies. History headline: Egyptians' success boosts Africans' confidence. December 22, 1956. The Suez Canal in Egypt is an important navigation channel for transporting oil to Europe. In July 1956, Nasser, the new Egyptian president, nationalized the Suez Canal, leading to the Suez crisis. Britain invaded Egypt to regain control of the Suez Canal, but finally withdrew troops under international pressure on December 1956. The victory against its former suzerain made Egypt influential in Africa. This also encouraged other African colonies to demand independence. 2. Independence of Ghana and rise of Pan-Africanism. In the 1950s, Nkrumah, a nationalist leader of the Gold Coast in West Africa, negotiated with Britain for independence. In 1957, the Gold Coast gained independence and was renamed Ghana. Nkrumah advocated and spread Pan-Africanism, meaning Africa for Africans. Ghana contributed to the establishment of the Organization of African Unity in 1963. This further encouraged the independence of the whole of Africa. 3. Year of Africa, 1960. After the Second World War, independence movements developed rapidly in the French colonies in Central and West Africa. In 1958, France allowed most African colonies to hold referendums to decide their future course. Guinea voted for independence first. In 1960, 12 colonies and 2 mandated territories of France, as well as some British and Belgian colonies, gained independence. A total of 17 new African nation-states were founded in that year. Nearly 2/3 of Africa had completed decolonization. Look at the source 9.35. Nkrumah was also one of the main initiators of the non-aligned movement in 1961. 4. Major developments of decolonization after 1961. Between 1961 and 1964, most French and British colonies gained independence successively. The process of decolonization was generally peaceful. Angola and Mozambique fought against Portugal in 1961 and 1964 respectively. They won independence in 1975. Their decolonization processes were relatively bloody. As comics say, Charles de Gaulle changed the fate of Africa. Main points of the comics. Do you think that de Gaulle's coming to power was a turning point in the decolonization of French colonies in Africa? 1. After the Second World War, France tried to restore colonial rule high-handedly. In 1954, the French colony of Algeria fought against France for independence. 2. France's bloody suppression of the Algerian revolt made the government unpopular. Domestic opposition became widespread. 3. In 1958, General de Gaulle came to power. He changed the colonial policies of France. He allowed its 13 African colonies to hold referendums. 4. Only Guinea voted for independence in the referendum, but other colonies also called for full independence afterwards. 5. 12 French colonies and 2 mandated territories became independent in 1960, the year of Africa. The French colonial empire collapsed. 2. Rise of the Third World. In the 1950s and the early 1960s, many former colonies in Asia and Africa gained full independence. They began to engage in different international conferences and organizations. The Third World was gradually formed and became an emergent force in international politics. A. What is the Third World? Third World, a term that emerged during the Cold War, referred to those countries belonging neither to the First World, more developed capitalist countries led by the United States, nor the Second World, communist countries led by the Soviet Union. In general, the Third World included the less developed countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Many of them were former Western colonies. B. Bandung Conference. In April 1955, Indonesia, Burma, Ceylon, India, and Pakistan held the Bandung Conference in Bandung. Indonesia. 29 Asian and African leaders attended it. It was the first Asian-African conference without the participation of the Western powers. Look at the source 9.37. In 1952, the French scholar Sauvy coined the term Third World. It made reference to the third estate, the lowest class in the old French society. The Cold War refers to the tense relations and confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union between 1946 and 1991. 1. Major achievements. At the conference, participating countries discussed economic and cultural cooperation and colonial issues. They also opposed colonialism and affirmed the right of national self-determination. They further declared the 10 principles of the Bandung Conference to promote world peace and strengthen international cooperation. The main points included respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all nations, recognition of the equality of all races and all nations, non-intervention in the internal affairs of other countries, rejecting the use of collective defense systems to serve the big powers, prohibiting acts or threats against the territorial integrity of any country, settling all international disputes by peaceful means, promotion of mutual interests and cooperation. Look at the source 9.38. The Bandung Conference in 1955 above, and Asian and African leaders attending the 60th anniversary ceremony of the Bandung Conference in 2015. 2. Significance. Consolidated independent position. Asian and African countries showed their diplomatic autonomy through participating in the Bandung Conference. This further consolidated their position as independent countries, promoted the rise of the Third World. The participating countries declared that they would not align with the United States or the Soviet Union. The collaboration of these countries was influential as they accounted for half of the world population. Their unity laid the foundation for the non-aligned movement and gave rise to the Third World. C. Non-aligned movement. The non-aligned movement was an international organization founded in 1961. Most members were Third World countries. Its membership is now second only to the United Nations. 1. Background. During the 1950s, the Cold War spread around the world. Also, over 10 Asian and African countries were newly established. In 1961, Yugoslavia, Egypt, Ghana, Indonesia, and India held a summit in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, to discuss international affairs. The non-aligned movement was formally founded. Look at the source 9.39. Leaders of the 5 founding countries of the non-aligned movement in 1961. 2. Main objectives. Based on the 10 principles of the Bandung Conference, the non-aligned movement advocated being unaligned with the United States or the Soviet Union. It also supported national self-determination and advocated cooperation to narrow the economic gap between more developed and less developed countries. 3. Structure. The non-aligned movement did not have a headquarters or permanent institutions. A summit conference would be held every 3 years. Members could not join any military alliances or sign military agreements with any major power or intervene in the conflicts between these powers. 4. Major developments. The non-aligned movement supported decolonization. It also absorbed newly independent countries as members to affirm their independent position. By 1964, it already had 47 members countries. 17 Latin American countries also joined in the 1970s and 1980s. Look at the source 9.40. Member countries and observer countries of the non-aligned movement in 1991 above and the 16th Summit Conference held in Iran in 2012 below. The organization also strove for the rights of its Third World members. In 1973, the Summit Conference of the organization proposed a new international economic order. This idea helped facilitate the adoption of the Declaration on the Establishment of a New International Economic Order, which protected the right of less developed countries to have control over their natural resources by the United Nations in 1974. 5. Significance. Rise in influence of the Third World. The non-aligned movement was mainly formed by Third World countries. All of this showed the rise in influence of the Third World. Helped maintain world peace. The non-aligned movement opposed forming alliances with the United States or the Soviet Union. This helped stop the spread of the Cold War. It also advocated that all countries should be allowed to develop their economies based on equality and mutual cooperation. All of this helped prevent conflicts and maintain peace. Look at the source 9.41, an overview of the changes in the international situation caused by decolonization after the Second World War. Before Second World War, many regions in Asia and Africa were ruled by European countries. After Second World War, European colonial countries declined. The decolonization of Asia and Africa started. After the 1950s, newly independent Asian and African countries formed the Third World. They became an emergent force beside the two blocs led by the United States and the Soviet Union. Data-based question 3. Aim: to understand the Bandung Conference and the situation in Asia and Africa after the Second World War. Level 3. Interpreting sources and using own knowledge. Study the source below and answer the questions that follow. Source: excerpts from the speech delivered by Indonesian President Sukarno at the opening of the Bandung Conference in 1955. We, members of the conference, were from different nations, different historical and cultural backgrounds, different religions, and even different colors of skin. Though it was so, we could be united by bitter experience of colonization and by the same wish and fight in promoting world peace. The conference will show our leaders that Asia and Africa can prosper only when they are united. Even the safety of the world cannot be safeguarded without a united Asia-Africa. I hope that the conference will give guidance to mankind, will point out to mankind the way which it must take to attain safety and peace. I hope that it will give evidence that Asia and Africa have been reborn, nay, that a new Asia, a new Africa have been born. D. Wars and inventions. The total war, new military warfare, and other inventions. Guiding questions. How did the two world wars change the mode of warfare? What were the impacts of these changes? What technological innovations were brought by the two wars? How did they affect our daily lives? 1. Change in the mode of warfare. Total war. A. The two world wars becoming total wars. During the First World War, neither the Central Powers nor the Allied Powers could win decisive victory quickly. The stalemate and technological innovations gradually caused the First World War to be a total war. Under total war, warfare was not confined to the front lines where the armies fought. The warring countries mobilized more resources in the rear, including manpower and agricultural and industrial goods to support a long-lasting war. This mode of warfare was also adopted during the Second World War. History in depth. Origin of the term total war. In 1935, German General Ludendorff published The Total War. In his book, he stressed that it was important to unite the will of the people and devote all resources to win a war. This was the origin of the term total war. Ludendorff stated that the degree of people's involvement was the key to victory in a total war. Later, Hitler took Ludendorff's theory of total war as a reference in establishing totalitarian rule and starting an aggressive war. B. Features of total war. In general, lives of civilians away from the front lines were less affected by the wars, except in paying for military expenses. Under total war, the warring countries would control and mobilize all national resources. Their policies were military-oriented. People were conscripted into the army or mobilized to produce military supplies. The differentiation between combatants and non-combatants disappeared. As civilians were regarded as rare servicemen, they also became attack targets. Look at the source 9.42. Diagrams showing features of total war. Military. Military strategy used bombers, missiles, and nuclear weapons to bomb population centers. Aim to destroy the enemy's armaments, economic production, and morale. Military strategy unlimited submarine warfare. Aim to hit the enemy's foreign contacts and trade. Economic. Wartime measures. Nationalized armaments factories and mines. Priority given to the production of military supplies. Aim to ensure supplies for the armed forces. Wartime measures. Issued war bonds. Massive printing of banknotes. Taxed imported luxury goods. Aim to raise funds for the war effort. Wartime measure. Forced labor was used in production, including women. Aim to keep up national production. Wartime measure. Introduced food rationing. Aim to save food for military needs. Social and cultural. Wartime measure. Adopted conscription and separated technicians from other civilians. Aim to deploy human resources effectively. Wartime measure. Censored the mass media and controlled communications. Aim to prevent the leakage of military secrets and spread of news that threatened the war situation. Political. Wartime measure. Expanded government powers. Aim to enable the government to mobilize national resources effectively. Wartime measure. Suppression of opposition. Detention of people regarded as hostile as anti-war. Aim to reduce opposition, to frighten people into supporting the government. Wartime measure. Carried out propaganda warfare, such as encouraging participation in war and demonizing the enemy. Aim to gain popular support. C. Impacts of total war on people. Total war is warfare not unrestricted by the territory. It affects broader aspects of people's lives and has greater influence. 1. Political aspect. Loss of freedom. The warring countries in the two world wars nationalized private enterprises and forced their people to participate in war production. People lost their property rights and freedom of employment. Besides, the government suppressed those who were against the rule. These deprived people of their freedom of speech or publication and of communication. 2. Economic aspect. Economic disruption. As priority was given to production of military supplies, daily necessities were in shortage. Massive printing of banknotes caused serious inflation. During the First World War, the failure of food rationing in Germany even led to a greater famine. Look at the source 9.43, a cartoon about a British family during the First World War. From the source. Study source 9.43. What were the impacts of the First World War on the British family as reflected in the source? 3. Social aspects. Heavier civilian casualties. As the battlefield was extended to the home front, total war caused more civilian casualties than other wars. For example, during the First World War, civilians who died as a result of military operations accounted for more than 1/10 of the war deaths. This seriously disrupted the social structure of the participating countries. Rise in women's position. Women were encouraged to participate in agricultural and industrial production in total war. Some women even served in the military. After the two world wars, their social status rose. European countries and the United States granted women the right to vote one after another. Women also got more employment opportunities and became economically independent. 2. Change in the mode of warfare. New armaments and three-dimensional warfare. A. New armaments and the rise of three-dimensional warfare. With the use of new armaments, the First World War saw the rise of three-dimensional warfare, including land, sea, and air battles. Land. Both German soldiers and Anglo-French allied soldiers dug trenches. This was known as trench warfare. Britain was the first country to use tanks in the war. Tanks could cross the trenches. However, they did not perform them well. In order to defend or break through the trenches, the participating countries used different weapons of mass destruction, including machine guns that were capable of sustained rapid fire, several hundred rounds per minute, toxic gas that was capable of damaging optic nerves or causing death, grenades that could be thrown from a distance and cause an explosion. Air. Fighter planes mainly carried out aerial spying, expulsion of enemies, and air-to-air fighting in the early days of the war. Later, they started to launch air raids. Aerial bombing became a key strategy in modern warfare. Sea. Dreadnoughts were the most powerful warships at the time. In 1916, more than 40 dreadnoughts were involved in the Anglo-German War. The submarines of Germany were called U-boats. They sank many neutral ships sailing to Britain. The Second World War was also fought in three dimensions. Fighter planes, tanks, and submarines were improved and more new armaments appeared. Nuclear weapons. The United States was the first country to have atomic bombs. Atomic explosions caused severe destruction and radioactive pollution of vast areas. In 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. Japan was forced to surrender unconditionally. Rockets. In 1944, Germany began launching unmanned V-2 rockets at British cities. These rockets proceeded on a particular course. They were capable of flying over the English Channel for long-range attacks, causing heavy civilian casualties and destruction. Aircraft carriers. Aircraft carriers could carry fighter planes and bomber aircraft. They could provide air support for fleets and carry out long-range attacks. In 1942, the American bomber aircraft that bombed Tokyo, Japan, took off from aircraft carriers. B. Impacts of military innovations. 1. Unprecedented heavy casualties. New armaments and three-dimensional warfare made the two world wars the most destructive wars in history. They killed more than 80 million people. The use of toxic gas and nuclear weapons also had long-term effects on human health. 2. Huge economic losses. The First World War cost $330 billion in damages. Many farmlands, factories, and houses in Europe were destroyed. The Second World War cost $1,000 billion in damages. Many regions were completely destroyed after attacks using new weapons. 3. Continuing threats to peace. The use of atomic bombs in the Second World War started the era of nuclear weapons. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union developed the more destructive hydrogen bombs. Today, nuclear weapons are still a major threat to world peace. Look at the source 9.44. The city center of Hiroshima was almost entirely destroyed by the atomic bombing below. One of the surviving buildings left was listed as UNESCO World Heritage Site. 3. Technological innovations brought by wars. During the two world wars, military needs promoted new technological innovations. These technologies and products were further developed and put to civil use after the war. A. Aviation and aerospace. 1. Jet engine. In 1939, a jet aircraft developed by German designer Heinkel made its first flight. In the latter stages of the Second World War, Germany developed jet fighters and operated them in the war. In 1949, British civilian planes first used the jet engine. This allowed planes to travel farther and faster. Civilian jet planes became popular. More airlines routes were opened and air transport was improved. 2. Rocket engine. During the Second World War, Germany successfully developed rockets which could travel through the atmosphere to bomb Britain. Starting from the 1950s, the United States and the Soviet Union used rocket engines to launch space exploration devices such as artificial satellites and space shuttles. The space age began. Artificial satellites were widely used in daily mobile communications, broadcasting, and weather forecasting. Look at the source 9.45, Heinkel and his jet aircraft. Look at the source 9.46, space exploration driven by rocket technology. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched the first artificial satellite to space. In 1961, the Soviet Union sent an astronaut to space by spacecraft. In 1981, the United States successfully launched the Space Shuttle Columbia. B. Information and Communications Technology. 1. Radar. During the Second World War, the Allied powers greatly improved radar technology, which could be used to detect and track their enemies. After the Second World War, more functions of radars were developed. Today, civil radars are widely used in navigation, weather forecasting, and environmental monitoring. 2. Computer. During the Second World War, the United States invented ENIAC, the world's first computer. Its processing speed was much faster than that of previous machines. It was also equipped with various programs which enabled the American Army to study the paths of missiles. After the war, computers were used in administration and business. In the 1970s, cheaper and more user-friendly personal computers became available. Computers became popular. Today, computer control systems are very common in daily life. Look at the source 9.47, a modern radar receiving station. History Extra. The Giant Brain. ENIAC, invented by Americans Mauchly and Eckert, was also called the Giant Brain at the time. This was not only because of its high performance, but also because of its huge size. ENIAC required 1,800 square feet of space and weighed over 27 tons. The heat generated by this giant computer caused a serious cooling problem. It also consumed a lot of electricity. It was said that when ENIAC was switched on, lights in Philadelphia dimmed. Look at the source 9.48, the computer ENIAC in the 1950s. C. Materials. 1. Cotton. In 1914, Kimberly-Clark Corporation, an American company, invented cotton. During the First World War, cotton was widely used on battlefields and in military hospitals. In the 1920s, cotton was used to make tissue paper and toilet paper. These paper products became popular quickly. Today, they are necessities in people's daily lives. 2. Stainless steel. During the First World War, the British scientist Brearley studied ways to improve the quality of gun barrels. He eventually made stainless steel, a material that is resistant to corrosion and oxidation. After the war, scientists further developed different types of stainless steel. They are different in hardness, corrosion resistance, and heat resistance. Today, stainless steel is also widely used in tableware and insulated products, as a building material, and so on. Look at the source 9.49. A paper warehouse of Kimberly-Clark Corporation in 1949. Today, the company has developed into a famous personal care product company. Look at the source 9.50. Brearley above was the inventor of stainless steel. Today, stainless steel is widely used. For example, production pipes and containers in wineries, beverage factories, and oil plants are made of stainless steel. D. Medicine and treatment. 1. Plastic surgery. During the First World War, Dr. Gillis invented many new surgical techniques for treating soldiers' facial wounds. They included taking gristle and skin from wounded soldiers' bodies to repair their damaged faces. In the post-war period, plastic surgery was highly valued and increasingly important. Today, many physical defects or disabilities can be better treated through plastic surgery. 2. Penicillin. During the Second World War, the United States urgently needed drugs that could effectively cure wounded soldiers. It eventually developed the techniques of large-scale penicillin production. After the war, penicillin became a civilian drug. It was used to treat some lung and brain diseases and greatly improved human health. Look at the source 9.51. During the First World War, Gillis performed skin grafting operations which reduced bacterial infection in wounds. He is therefore called the father of modern plastic surgery. History in depth. Antibiotics and drug-resistant bacteria. The discovery and mass production of penicillin helped people fight against bacteria with antibiotics. However, the battle between antibiotics and bacteria continues. To fight against antibiotics, some bacteria have evolved to become drug-resistant. Some scholars therefore state that antibiotics should not be used excessively. Otherwise, more bacteria will become drug-resistant. Look at the source 9.52. Although the British scientist Fleming discovered penicillin in 1928, the technology for large-scale production was developed during the Second World War. E. Daily tools. 1. Zipper. In 1914, the engineer Sundback improved the zipper. During the First World War, zippers were used by the United States on military uniforms and boots. From the 1930s, the use of zippers on clothes, shoes, and handbags became increasingly popular. Today, zippers have become a necessary accessory in people's lives. 2. Waterproof clothing. During the First World War, British businessman Burberry designed a waterproof suit for the military. It was wind and water resistant. Soldiers could wear it to fight in the trenches. Therefore, it was called a trench coat. This waterproof military coat was still popular during the Second World War. Later, it further developed into the windbreaker for daily wear. Today, windbreakers are a fashionable clothing item with different styles. Look at the source 9.53. Sundback obtained a patent for the zipper and became an early producer of zippers. Look at the source 9.54. British soldiers wearing waterproof trench coats during the First World War, above. Waterproof trench coats remained a kind of military uniform, but also developed into fashion items for both men and women, left. F. Energy. Use of nuclear energy. In 1942, the United States started the Manhattan Project to develop nuclear weapons. The scientist Fermi built the first nuclear reactor in Chicago to generate nuclear energy. After the Second World War, many countries built nuclear power plants to satisfy the increasing demand for energy source. By 1999, nuclear energy had become an important energy source. It accounted for about 16% of the world's total power generation. History in depth. Nuclear accidents that shocked the world. Though the capacity of nuclear energy is very high, the nuclear waste generated is very dangerous. Nuclear power plant accidents can cause serious disasters. Chernobyl nuclear disaster, 1986. In 1986, a nuclear leakage occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power station in Ukraine. Hundreds of thousands of civilians were forced to evacuate. The pollutants even spread to Western Europe and North America. About 1 million people in the world have become sick or even died due to the nuclear radiation. Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster, 2011. After a tsunami in 2011, a massive radiation leakage occurred at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant in Japan. Today, the areas surrounding the plant are still affected by the leakage and associated problems. Nuclear safety has become a concern in many countries again. Look at the source 9.55. The areas surrounding the Chernobyl nuclear disaster became dead cities, left. At the accident site, the monument to those who saved the world was placed to commemorate people who risked their lives to stop the leakage. Data-based question 4. Aim: to understand the development and use of radar. Level 3. Interpreting sources and using your own knowledge. Study the source below and answer the questions that follow. Source: information about the development and use of radar. The magnetron, which was used to generate microwaves, was invented during the Second World War. It could increase the radar's ability to track enemy fighters. The Raytheon Company in the United States further improved the magnetron so that it could be mass-produced and used in military radar. Raytheon engineers also discovered that microwaves from a magnetron could generate heat and be used to cook food. In 1947, Raytheon sold the world's first civilian microwave oven for $3,000. After the war, radar was widely used in daily life. For example, people found that radar could track changes in clouds and provide information about storms. Today, radar is still one of the main tools for weather forecasting. E. Genocide. Using the Holocaust as an example. Guiding questions. What is genocide? Why were the Jews massacred by Nazi Germany? What harm did it cause? How did the international community avoid repeating the same mistake? What reflections did the Germans have in the post-war period? 1. What is genocide? The United Nations defines genocide as an intentional elimination of all or part of a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. In the 20th century, several genocides occurred. The Holocaust, from 1941 to 1945, carried out by Nazi Germany, was the most brutal in history. About 6 million Jews were killed. 2. Origins of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism refers to hostile thoughts and activities against Jewish people. It had a long history in Europe. Jews believed in Judaism and kept their own customs. They had long been discriminated against by Christians and were always blamed for disasters. In the late 19th century, extreme nationalism emerged in Europe. Anti-Semitism became more radical. Many anti-Jewish political parties were formed in Germany. History in depth. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion published in Russia in 1903, stated that the Jews aimed to dominate the world. They had set up a secret society which had branches all over the world. It also suggested that all the problems in Russia were caused by the Jews. Since 1918, the book had been translated into other languages and became popular in Europe. It has now been proved to be a forgery. Nevertheless, the book became an important driving force of anti-Semitism in Europe in the first half of the 20th century. Look at the source 9.56, a French version of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, published in 1940. 3. Reasons for Nazi anti-Semitism. During the interwar period, the Nazi Party in Germany, led by Hitler, was hostile to the Jews for various reasons. It proposed extreme anti-Jewish policies. A. Stab in the back myth. The Nazis believed in the stab in the back myth. The myth was that the Jews had stabbed Germany in the back, which led to Germany's defeat in the First World War. The Nazis saw the Jews as traitors and extremely hated them. B. Germany's post-war problems. After the First World War, Germans lived hard lives, but Jews were relatively better off. The Nazi Party accused the Jews of making huge profits through disrupting the economy. They were blamed as the origin of economic and social crisis. C. Nazi theory of racial superiority. Hitler advocated a theory of racial superiority and believed that the Aryans, ancestors of the Germans, were the most superior race. He regarded the Jews as the inferior race and devils. They would destroy Aryan culture and were enemies of all Germans. Look at the source 9.57, a German cartoon about the stab in the back myth, published in 1920. Look at the source 9.58, Nazi poster showing the differences in appearance between German and Jewish youth. According to Hitler, an Aryan had blonde hair and blue eyes and was tall. 4. Early stages of Jewish persecution from 1933 to 1940. A. Anti-Jewish measures. In 1933, Hitler came to power. He introduced a series of anti-Jewish policies, including dismissing Jewish civil servants, prohibiting the Jews from working as doctors, judges, and journalists, destroying Jewish shops, prayer halls, and schools. B. The Nuremberg Laws, 1935. In September 1935, the Nazi Party enacted the Nuremberg Laws. It abolished the civil rights of Jews. The main points included prohibition of marriages between Jews and Germans, abolition of the citizenship of Jews, abolition of the right of Jews to vote and to hold public office. Look at the source 9.59. Definition of Jews and Germans according to the Nuremberg Laws, 1935. Germans. No grandparents were of Jewish descent. Had Reich citizenship. Mischlinge. Mixed race, one or two grandparents were of Jewish descent. Still retained Reich citizenship but were restricted from intermarriage with Germans. Jews. At least 3 of their grandparents were of Jewish descent. Lost their Reich citizenship and were strictly prohibited from intermarriage with Germans. C. The Night of Broken Glass, 1938. In November 1938, the Nazi Party claimed that an official was killed by a Jew. The Nazis destroyed Jewish prayer halls and shops. Heavy casualties resulted. The incident was called the Night of Broken Glass. However, many Jews were imprisoned and asked to pay reparations after the incident. History in depth. Labeled Jews. The Nazi Party discriminated against Jews through labeling. In 1941, it issued a new identity card. The identity card for all Jews over 6 years old had the letter J, meaning Jude, Jew in German. Later, all Jews over 6 years old in German-occupied territories had to wear a badge with the Star of David and the word Jude in the center. In some ghettos and concentration camps, the Jews were ordered to have similar symbols on their clothes, both front and back. Look at the source 9.60. Identity card of a Jewish girl with the letter J above, and Jews wearing the yellow Star of David below. D. Nazi concentration camps. In 1933, the Nazi Party started to build concentration camps, at first for imprisoning people opposed to the Nazis. During the Second World War, the Nazi Party not only set up Jewish ghettos in its occupied areas, but also built many concentration camps to hold Jews. Jewish concentration camps were divided into different categories. In work camps, the Jews engaged in military production and coal mining. They were forced to work for more than 12 hours a day. In extermination camps, Jews were killed by shooting and poisoning. 5. The Holocaust, 1941-1945. A. Start of the genocide. In 1941, Nazi Germany occupied most of the Eastern European territories of the Soviet Union. It then systematically arrested and murdered the Jews there on a massive scale. The Nazis also encouraged people in the occupied territories such as Romania, Lithuania, and Latvia to kill Jews. Look at the source 9.61. Jews in concentration camps were weak due to the lack of food. They had to wear thin clothes, even in winter. Source 9.62. The Jews boarding a train to the Auschwitz concentration camp in 1942, above. The trains were known as death trains, while the entrance to Auschwitz was called the Death Gate, below. B. The final solution to the Jewish question. In January 1942, Nazi leaders decided to adopt the final solution to the Jewish question, a plan to systematically exterminate all Jews in Europe at the 1C Conference. After that, Nazi Germany sped up the construction of concentration camps. By 1944, 90% of the Jews in Germany and Poland had been killed, and most of the Jewish communities in the occupied territories had been destroyed. About 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. Look at the source 9.63. Distribution of major Nazi concentration camps in September 1944. C. Historical evidence of the genocide. The Auschwitz concentration camp. During the Second World War, about 1 million Jews were killed in the Auschwitz concentration camp. After the war, the brutalities of the concentration camps were revealed. People can learn about the genocide committed by Nazi Germany. 1. The Jews were transported by train to the concentration camp. During the long journey, they were not given any food. Upon arrival, they were examined by Nazi officials or doctors and classified into different groups according to gender, age, and physique. 2. Young and strong Jewish men were forced to produce resources and even to dig the soil just to tire them out. 3. The old and weak, women and children were killed in gas chambers first. In the end, most Jews were killed. 4. The Nazis conducted inhuman medical experiments in the medical laboratory. A lot of Jews were disfigured, permanently disabled, or even killed. 6. Post-Second World War developments. A. Trials before the International Military Tribunal. In May 1945, Germany surrendered. The Allied powers immediately banned the Nazi Party. Later, the Charter of the International Military Tribunal was issued. It confirmed the establishment of the world's first international military tribunal in Nuremberg to try major Nazi war criminals and organizations. In November, the Nuremberg trials started. Nazi leaders who led the Holocaust were sentenced to life imprisonment or death. Between 1946 and 1949, more than 1,000 Nazis were tried in other trials. Some charges included genocide of the Jews. History Extra. Why Nuremberg? Nuremberg is an industrial city located in southeastern Germany. The International Military Tribunal was established there because of the following reasons. The Nazis were war criminals. The trials were therefore established in Germany and held in a surviving court in Nuremberg. The Nazi Party had held many huge rallies in Nuremberg. It also passed the anti-Jewish Nuremberg laws. The Allied powers believed that holding the trials in Nuremberg could mark the end of Nazi rule in Germany. B. Passage of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. During the Second World War, the Polish Jewish lawyer Lemkin first proposed the concept of genocide. After the war, he actively called for the recognition of genocide as a crime. In 1948, the United Nations adopted the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. The convention aimed to prevent genocide. For the first time, it adopted genocide as a legal term and confirmed that it was an international crime, whether in peace or war. The signatories agreed to prevent genocide and to severely punish the crime. C. Germany's self-reflection on the Holocaust. 1. Eradicated totalitarianism and racial discrimination. Germany drew lessons from Nazi rule. It carried out political and legal reforms. Post-war Germany adopted a federal system and weakened presidential power. It also introduced a new constitution which protected people from racial and religious discrimination. Look at the source 9.64. On January 27, 1945, the Soviet Army liberated the Auschwitz concentration camp. In 2005, January 27 was designated as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. 2. Public apology and mourning. Post-war Germany bore its responsibility for the Holocaust. German leaders admitted in public the crime of genocide. They also apologized to the victims on behalf of the nation. Brandt, the former Chancellor of West Germany, even knelt in front of the monument of the ghetto heroes in Warsaw in 1970. Moreover, annual events were held throughout Germany to recall and reflect on the history of the Holocaust. The government also built monuments and museums and changed some former Nazi concentration camps into memorial halls to commemorate the murdered Jews. Mourning the murdered Jews. The memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe is located in Berlin. It consists of more than 2,700 unmarked concrete blocks of different heights. The memorial has strong symbolic significance. On December 7, 1970, Brandt knelt in front of the monument to the ghetto heroes in Warsaw, Poland. He asked the victims for forgiveness on behalf of Germany. Jenninger, president of the West German parliament, tried to explain the reasons why Germans had supported Nazism in a speech in 1988. More than 50 members left in protest. Jenninger later resigned. 3. Compensation and consolation. In 1952, West Germany and Israel signed the Luxembourg Agreement. West Germany would supply Israel with goods and services valued at 3.5 billion marks as well as personal compensation to Jewish people. Additionally, West Germany would also return property taken from Jews. Germany set up compensation funds. Today, Jewish Holocaust survivors still receive compensation. The German government also regularly sends its records to them. 4. Long-term investigations and trials. Germany continued to investigate criminals involved in the persecution and murder of Jews. Those who had left Germany were repatriated for trial. For example, between 1963 and 1968, the West German government filed a lawsuit against Nazi officials who managed the Auschwitz concentration camp. A dark space. The Holocaust Tower is located in the Jewish Museum, Berlin. When visitors enter the dark concrete building, it is like being inside a death train traveling to a concentration camp and gas chamber. Continuous pursuit of justice. In 1986, Demjanjuk was tried for his involvement in the Holocaust, but was released after an appeal. In 2009, new evidence was found and Demjanjuk was put on trial again. 5. Education. After the war, the German government taught people about the harms of extreme nationalism and Nazism. It worked with Poland, Israel, and other countries to write history textbooks to reveal historical truth. It reaffirmed that school education should not deny or praise Nazi crimes. The textbooks clearly stated that Nazi Germany's persecution and massacres of the Jews caused atrocities. It organized overseas victims to let students learn about the cultures and customs of different peoples. It arranged student visits to concentration camp sites to explore and reflect on the cruelties of the Holocaust. Look at the source 9.65, History Education in Germany after the war. Secondary school students joined Jewish memorial activities. Primary school students visit the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe. Students conducted oral history studies of Jewish life in the Nazi era, from top to bottom. Data-based question 5. Aim: to understand the genocide conducted by Germany during the war and its responses after the war. Level 3. Interpreting sources and making use of own knowledge. Study the source below and answer the questions that follow. Source: excerpts from the televised address given by Brandt during his visit to Poland in 1970. The Warsaw Treaty should write an end to the sufferings and sacrifices of an evil past. It should build a bridge between the two states and their peoples. It should open the way to bringing divided families back together again and make frontiers less divisive. We must not forget that Poland's suffering after 1939 was worse than anything else it had to endure in the course of its history. For a long time to come, names like Auschwitz will be in the minds of both nations and will remind us that hell on earth is possible. We have experienced it, but this very experience compels us to tackle the problems of the future with resolution. Escape from reality creates dangerous illusions. I maintain, therefore, that to uphold this treaty, reconciliation and peace is to accept German history in its entirety. Concept consolidation. The First World War, 1914-1918. Background and causes of the war. Economic and colonial competition. Armaments race. Alliance system. Extreme nationalism. Pre-war conflicts and immediate cause. The Moroccan crisis, 1905-1906 and 1911. The Bosnian crisis, 1908. The Balkan Wars, 1912 and 1913. Immediate cause of the war, the Sarajevo incident, 1914. Problems left behind by the First World War. Failure of the Paris Peace Conference, 1919. Major settlements: signed the Treaty of Versailles with Germany, achieved national self-determination, formed a collective security system. Discontent of Italy and Germany about the settlements. Hidden dangers in national self-determination. Economic problems in the interwar period. Economic downturn after the First World War. The Great Depression, 1929. 1933. Rise of totalitarianism. Totalitarianism in Italy, fascism. Totalitarianism in Germany, Nazism. Totalitarianism in Japan, militarism. Aggressions of the totalitarian countries in the 1930s. Attempts at collective security and their failure. Setbacks of the League of Nations. Appeasement policy of Britain and France. Isolationism of the United States. The Soviet Union drawn closer to Germany. Wars and inventions. Total war and new military warfare more greatly affected people's lives, caused serious casualties and destruction, created continuing threats to peace. Technological innovations brought by the wars improved human life. The Second World War, 1939-1945. Events leading to the war and immediate cause. Further expansion of Germany and Italy, March-April 1939. Immediate cause of the war, German invasion of Poland, September 1939. Genocide, the Holocaust. Genocide, the intentional elimination of all part of a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. Origins of anti-Semitism and reasons for Nazi and anti-Semitism. Early stages of Jewish persecution from 1933 to 1940. The Holocaust, 1941-1945. Trials before the International Military Tribunal. Passage of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Germany's self-reflection on the Holocaust. Decolonization of Asia and Africa and the rise of the Third World in the post-war period. Decolonization of Asia. American colony, suzerain's assistance. British colonies, negotiation. French and Dutch colonies, armed struggle. Decolonization of Africa. Independence of Egypt and decline of British colonial power. Independence of Ghana and rise of Pan-Africanism. 1960, the year of Africa. Major developments of decolonization after 1961. Formation and rise of the Third World. The Third World, less developed countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Many of them were former Western colonies. Bandung Conference, 1955. Consolidated the independent position of Asian and African countries, promoted the rise of the Third World. Non-aligned movement, 1961. Rising influence of the Third World, helped maintain world peace. A global outlook. 1882. Triple Alliance formed in Europe. 1905. The first Moroccan crisis occurred. 1907. Triple Entente formed. 1908. The Bosnian crisis occurred. 1911. The second Moroccan crisis occurred. 1912. The First Balkan War broke out. 1913. The Second Balkan War broke out. 1914. The Sarajevo incident occurred. And the First World War broke out. 1919. Paris Peace Conference held. Germany signed the Treaty of Versailles. 1920. The League of Nations established. 1928. Fascist regime in Italy established. 1929. The Wall Street crash. The Great Depression began. 1934. Nazi regime in Germany established. 1935. The first Neutrality Act passed. 1936. Militarist regime in Japan established. 1938. Munich Agreement reached. 1939. Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact signed. And the Second World War broke out. 1940. Germany, Italy, and Japan formed the Axis powers. 1941. Nazi Germany started the Holocaust. 1945. Decolonization of Asia and Africa started. 1955. Bandung Conference held. 1961. Non-aligned movement established. Fascist regime in Spain. In 1939, General Franco, who was supported by Germany and Italy, overthrew the Republican government and established a fascist dictatorship in Spain. When the Second World War broke out, Spain declared neutrality, but it secretly supported the Axis powers. Later, Franco turned closer to the Allied powers and reached a cooperation agreement. After the war, Franco's dictatorship was condemned internationally, but its anti-communist stance won the favor of the United States. Spain-US relations were normalized in the 1950s. The fascist regime in Spain remained until the death of Franco in 1975.